Sasuke-kun, I know how you feel. Nubatama used to be great, but now that we lost Kokoshigarasu, we're no longer great. Wake up to reality. Nubatama is still great. What's up, amigos? Today we're going to do Nubatama Premium, specifically Shiranui. This is what I took to BCS Rosemont, and I got X2 with it. A lot of focus and preparation went into it months prior, and I'm excited to finally show it off. So let's get right into it. So a couple things that I really had in mind was because of the metagame and also what Shiranui provided. History Collection gave us the strides that were able to superior stride during the main phase by discarding the grade summation of grade 3s at that point. So Nubatama for the longest had a lackluster grade 3 turn, and I think that's what's been holding it back these past recent years. And of course, we also got a hit a little bit with the ban list with Kokoshigarasu, but we can make do without it with Mizukaze, for example. And so with the metagame considerations, like one of the big contenders was Mega Colony, mainly because of the Dark Phase synergy with the GB2 skill, but then it has access to Ghidorah grade 4, it has access to Brilliant Blister, Grisford, and all these other cards that you kind of have to deal with. And in addition to that, we had Hanalees potentially in the metagame. As we saw with Toronto, they had played Hanalees like 2 to 3 copies all in top 4. And this deck actually utilizes Hanalee as well to kind of like help survive against those like super aggressive multi-attack decks, whether they're Excel base or just multi-attack decks like your Chronicle, for example. So with that, I wanted to focus a deck that kind of just didn't care as much when it came to those matchups and all these things kind of stacked against it. And so that's why I went with Shiranui, just Nubatama. A lot of the aspect that you can combine it with are cards like Mizukaze, which makes it really hard for guarding in general. So when you combine it with your Rinne and also Jakumesso turns, even your opponent may have a decent hand size, but if you can't guard anymore with certain cards anymore, it's almost like they have no cards in hand, and then you can hit the 6 damage at that point too. And I did face Mega Colony, and I did face some decks that use Hanale too as well, so my assumptions were actually on point. So if I played a deck like Thavas, Night Rose, or some other multi-attack deck, it would be a little more challenging. And lastly, when it comes to like the first grade 3 turn for Shiranui, you're able to go into the Geta stride, and really what it does, it just helps like discard a card from the opponent. It's not that fantastic, it's decent at that point, but you get 2 protect markers. If you get the ulti in your drive check, you can potentially restand and also have them discard another card. But we have to really capitalize on the rear guard setup that we're trying to accomplish, whether it be that same turn or even the prior turn with like grade 2 turn skills example. So you'll see what I mean as I lay out the card choices, but keep that in mind as the forefront when going first. And so onto the grade 3s, we're playing 3 copies of Shiranui Oboro. I have the 2 alternate art and also the SP hot stamp from the G trial deck. I had this baby just sitting there for many years, so I'm happy that, you know, these look fantastic. You can play 4 if you want to feel a little more comfortable too, but I feel like 3 was able to be possible to be able to squeeze in another card to suffice for something else. You have other cards that can help you with the consistency of seeing this. We also have a grade 1 in such as Unen that can search for it too if you open up with another grade 3 normal unit. So that way you can search what you need, you're good to go. And then there's other cards that improve consistency overall too. And just seeing this card. Now label those combos as we cover those. But essentially the right fit skill is also super important. This is where you can set up Mizukaze. So for example, if you're going to your turn, you go into a Jakumesso or even your Rinne, you can call grade 0 to nullify essentially the calling of grade 0s from their hand. That means they're draw PGs, but you could also do grade 1s in case they play the grade 1 PGs as well. So it's just dependent on the matchup, but most decks is really that grade 0. And so that right face really procs for Mizukaze, making it challenging to really guard those things too. And depending if you can set it up really well, it can be game ended at that point too. And then the on-stride skill, it's always dominate something, and you can attack anything. You can attack the Vanguard, you can attack the rear guard if it doesn't hit, or you just want to get rid of an annoying rear guard, but more than likely you're going to hit the Vanguard just to have another attack, especially paired up with the Rinne's GB3 skill. That unit would also see a total of plus 14k and then an additional crit. So never underestimate that. And sometimes you may not go into the Geta stride where you can get the 2 protect markers if you're going second. You might go straight into Jakumesso to generate some advantage, and then later on you can still do the stride because you technically haven't gotten any gifts and you're still in a grade 3 Oboro, so you could always fall back to that if needed. Otherwise, you'll right into the other Shiranui. And in this case, it's the OG Shiranui, but the V-Series version. So this card is great for rearguard base mostly. Essentially, it's a 22k beater. You have the option to put it into soul to draw a card, and then of course choose up to one of your opponent's rearguards to bounce it. And if something was bounced, they discard a card. So this is important because I realized during testing that we need some type of beater, and this was the most reliable that we had. I actually tried it out at 1, tried it out 2 copies, and I bumped it up to 3. That for the rear guard base, but also being a Vanguard potentially just to have the protect marker because it does have it. So you can go straight into Jakumesso if you need to be, if you're going second. But the 22k power, you just need a Shiranui Vanguard. So when you attack with it on the Jakumesso turn, you don't have to put it into Soul right away. You can actually bounce it with Jakumesso and then call it back after the call, and then you can put triggers on it if you need to. But then at that point, that's when you can also get the 22k power plus any triggers, then put it into Soul, draw a card, and then bounce something on their side of the field. And as a result, you'll have a grade 3 in Soul. That's one of the biggest things too. So this during the battle phase is a grade 3 that can go into Soul. So if you have a Jakumesso turn where you're going to use Mizukaze, you can surprise Mizukaze with the Jakumesso call during the battle phase. So they've already guarded with grade 1s and grade 0s. They're like, oh crap. They may not be able to even defend against the Vanguard because the Vanguard will go crit and plus 10. So it just makes it even more like scarier. But that setup for Mizukaze is a lot more easier with this card too. So again, super. So you can see it as 6 writable grade 3 targets. And I think that's really the shining moment to transition into Mizukaze. I'm playing 2 copies because we are playing the Forbidden, so there's another way to search it or revive it. And this card is still mandatory. This is really the card that I think is keeping Nubatama as a contender as well. We did lose Kokushigeru, but this is a great alternate still that we can rely on. And honestly, it's won me about 3 out of my 5 games. Yeah, 3 out of my 5 games with Mizukaze somehow being involved. So it's just really solid. And again, also there's some confusion with this card too that I want to elaborate. I made a domination FAQ sheet, so if you want to refer that. But essentially, once you're an opponent, it has called in general. It could be rearguard circle, guardian circle, and so on. They can not longer guard later on with that same grade. So it's like after the fact that it was called. So if you guarded for the first time with the grade 0, that is your opportunity to call as many zeros as you can, because after that, you will not be able to do so for the rest of the term. So we have Forbidden and the Hot Spice Tech. This is the Gaomi Yubu. I don't know how to say it, but I did my best. So some of you probably don't even know what this card is. Some of you do know what it is, and you're probably asking, like, why? Forbidden obviously searches for any grade 3s. We could search our Mizukaze's, our Shiranui OG V series, and this card. So when you're going first, grabbing Mizukaze is 9 times out of 10 useless because you don't have a grade 3 right off the back. And then if you did, you really don't even care for the skill just yet because it's so early damage, and your opponent's probably going to take some hits anyway and then guard with the few cards that they can. So it's not a big deal. So I wanted another card that can help, and I've thought of the Esperiata, and I play tested it with it for the longest too because it's a grade 4. You can add it to your hand thanks to Forbidden, and then if you want to, you can discard it for the cost of stride. There's moments essentially where you may have to make a decision where you only have the Oboro and you have the Forbidden, and if you ride this to Red Vanguard, now you have to discard a grade 3 unless you pitch 2, which you don't want to. So Esperiata helps in that situation, but this card also helps, and what it does is a very simple effect, but it does a lot more practically. Act. So last one. Return this unit from rearguard circle back to hand and call an evil decoy token. And it's these bad boys right here. Substitution Jutsu. So you can bounce this, create some tokens to create some 5k shield essentially when you're going first with the Geta Stride. That way you have some 5k intercepts that can help you preserve hand to have a healthy hand size moving forward too. You could also keep them for the grade 2 that actually gets power for 5k each token. So you can set that out without using a counterblast in case you were counterblast denied or you already used a prior turn and stayed at that same amount of damage, right? Little tricks like that. But ultimately, this gives you the value that you can just like create those tokens for free in a way without counterblast. And you have a grade 3 that you can also pitch for the Geta Stride, so that way you're good to go. This comes up also against the Mega Colony matchup because this can bounce itself right before they go into their actual Gridora plays, especially if they did like Jaggy Devil, for example, if they went first. They could try to Soul Blast through and rest this, but it does nothing. So you just create these tokens, and then finally they can rest something else. But if you like, your Jakumesso will bounce stuff that gets rested anyway. And then because you have this due to Forbidden, or maybe you call it to use it from your hand, you have a writable grade 3 target moving forward too. So worst case scenario, if you don't have a Shiranui grade 3, you still have this guy in hand, so you can keep riding it, so that way you can go toe-to-toe against Mega Conley pretty easily at that point too. Also, the soul is not that bad, especially now that we don't play Kokushuri Gara, so you don't have to worry about having like 3 in soul. This really uses that excess soul. We have cards that soul charge too, so it's a easily manageable resource compared to Counterblast, where we want to stay a low damage, but also use our Counterblast for our strides and also some grade 2s that we have as well. Lastly, grade 3 heals, I'll go right quickly. This is a grade 3 that you can ride with Mega Colony if needed, but this is what helps you survive defensively. When you're going second, you need cards like this and Hanali to keep survival against multi-attack decks. This is a grade 3, so you can pitch it if needed to make it a 1 pitch, but ultimately you want to save these for the early game defensively and also perhaps use your G guards in the future too. Also, what's really cool too, we have a grade 1 that can search this if you really need it going second matchup, and I'll cover that card once we get to it. So I typically go from grade 3s to grade 2s to grade 1s, grade 0s, and then the strides because it kind of makes sense most of the time. This is a little bit different. I'm gonna go, now that you see like the grade 3s already, I'm gonna go from like writing grade 1 to grade 2 essentially. So that way you can kind of see the flow on what I'm trying to portray to you. So 4 copies of Unen. This is your ultimate like best ride target because it has the Erode Upon skill. Basically, in your grade 2 turn, you can Soul Blast something, and then you reveal that grade 3 normal unit, maybe your Oboro, your Mizukaze, your Shiranui, or the token generator, and then you search the other card that you may need. This card can actually search a multitude of targets. So if you're going second, you can search for the grade 3 heal. If you're going first and you already have the Oboro, you can search for Forbididol, and then also you can just maybe maximize on this too, or if you need to have a copy of the Oboro because you have a different grade 3, it fixes that. So it fixes it and gets you what you need. Whether you're going first or second, this card just like is phenomenal. And so part of it, I had a love-hate relationship prior because it was only that good if you wrote it on grade 1. And if you didn't, then you kind of miss out on that skill. There's a grade 2 that helps with the consistency, which I'll get into it. But essentially, it's become a lot more consistent that I can feel a lot more confident playing at 4 copies too. I went from like 2 to 3 to like 4 essentially at this point. There's also the other skill that could come up once in a while. It's really like matchup dependent too. So at the end of the battle that it boosted, you can actually soul charge the boosted unit into soul and then choose 2 of your rear guards and bounce them back to hand. This is flexible because you can shove grade 3s if needed for the Mizukaze during that battle phase if needed. There's also like the synergy of like moving your rear guards out, so that way decks like Mega Conley and other decks can't really take advantage of it. The Nubatama Mare, for example, if they're not on Shiranui Oboro, they can't do the on-stride dominate, nor like any strides that can dominate what's currently on your field. So it makes it a lot harder for them to like go into the strides and make some effective turns at that point. So that's why like that skill could come up. Also, what I noticed with this deck, like it doesn't draw a super amount of hand advantage. So if you're calling boosters and you feel like you still want them back to hand to guard with, you can soul charge whatever you boosted and then return your boosters that are grade 1s and then just go from there. 3 copies of Doggo over here. So this is the grade 1 top 5 grade 3 searcher. Helps with the consistency of getting your grade 3s that you needed, whether you need Oboro, your grade 3 heals, your Forbididols. This can grab Forbididol, which is really nice actually. It searches for grade 3 card, and so that's super helpful. If there's a token on the field, it's a 13k booster attacker. This actually comes up a lot more. I actually used to play a build that was Magatsu Gale, so I didn't play as much token generators, so this card would always be like 8k. Which kind of made it lackluster, but now with the tokens in there, it actually becomes a lot more relevant too. And again, it's one of those things that you could also deck in with the Jakumesso call, because it calls to hand. This can trigger, and then you can grab a grade 3 that you may need, or maybe you want to filter out, so that way your drive check's a little more scary. As you play this deck, and as you notice with cards like Unen, this card, and a few other cards that I'll label in the grade 2s, they will stack them continually. And I'll actually bring that up because it came up during my BCS tournament experience, but also like even in practice, that made me rely on certain things. And so we have also 3 copies of Hanali. Hanali, you need this against the multi-attack decks. Like if I realized that like one thing is surviving the grade 2 turn if they went first, the next thing is surviving the next stride turn or 2 that you're gonna go into. I noticed Nubatama like is strong, but it's not like super busted strong where like, oh, I just need to get to my D stride, my actual stride and win. Shiranui, Rinne, and Mizukaze have technically gotten weaker Yes, in certain scenarios, it's game ending. It's broken, but it has gotten weaker because of orders, because of blitz orders, protect markers, especially with the history collection cards. The protect clans get 2 protects immediately. Not only that, but we get 2 ticket shields if they're going second as well. So you have to deal with like a weakened Rinne turn, and I'll cover that once I go into Rinne more. So you need Hanali to keep surviving. So there are matchups where you can keep it on board. There are matchups where you have to remove it and just keep using a Hanali per turn just to be able to continuously survive. But you use like your own multi-attack aspect with Jakumesso, and also the dominated attacks also count. So don't forget that. So if you use cards like Rinne where they call 2 and then you did the on-stride dominate, that's 3 dominated attacks that are counted. And so when you actually go to your battle phase, you're already technically in the 4th battle. So always be mindful of that too. Lastly, I did have room for the Sanctitude. You want to play this because you actually want to use a 1-card PG, but this is also a blitz order. So for Bitter Dozen order, this is a blitz order. You can use this against the Nubatama mare. But most decks are going into the grade 4s anyway, so this is a 1-card PG. This also gets around guard restriction things. So that's one of the things in practice that I had to like learn was like, let's say for Grand Blue, they have Bartholomew. That demands 3 cards when they have 30 or more in drop. This gets around it because it goes to the order area instead of the Guardian Circle. Same thing with Mizukaze. It gets around that too. And other guard restriction decks, so that, you know, that come to mind a bit. Deep Police, for example. On to the grade 2s. Now, this is what I got really excited for Nubatama. And at first, this card, I didn't... Like, these cards are interesting, because at first you kind of read the skill, like the first skill, like when this unit attacks boosted, Soul Blast 1, and if your opponent has 4 more cards, discard it. It's an okay skill, right? It can be, like, pressuring, but it's an okay skill. But what I really appreciate these cards is the second skill, is that you can discard this at the beginning of your right phase. If your Vanguard is grade 1 or less, you could check the top 5 and add a grade 2 or less card and add it to your hand. So this can add itself if you so happen to see it, but you get a better chance to dig deeper for your grade 1s, for your grade 2s that you actually want to ride with. This is really value at this point, so that's why I maxed out at 4. But also, like, there are moments where, like, you don't have a grade 1, but you have this. And after your mulligan, if you don't have a grade 1, that's like the worst time to GSS most times. But if you have this card, this helps you dig 5 more cards deeper to potentially get that grade 1 that you do need to ride with. And so that way, consistently, you're able to ride up with like no problem. And if you see my grade 1s, it's reduced to essentially 10 rideable grade 1s too. So this card's even more appreciated when it comes to that. So I'm not like, you know, missing out on GSS, due to GSS, I should say. And it sucks. But the other skill can come up, but it's not as much. You'd rather save the soul for something else, but you can have it really pressuring where, like, in the early game, you can kind of force the blitz orders, like the ticket and the 20k ticket, potentially out of an opponent. Otherwise, they'll have to take a little more damage. So that's part of, like, the mind game that you're trying to also play. Like, can I get those cards out of their hand because they have to force guard with it, with my early game, essentially. And that can potentially help you when you do a Rinne turn, for example. So the next card, and this is another card that you really want to see ride as Vanguard. This is the Shoujo Doji card. And at first, I did not like this card either. So for all you players thinking, like, I hate this card, I feel you. I felt like the same way. If there was a way to consistently ride this, like, a lot more, like, very often, then I'm like, okay, I'm game for that, you know? And that's what the grade 2 does. And then you have till grade 2 turn to see it. I was also playing 4 copies to maximize it, but after a while, you're kind of able to get away with the promo. And also it's like drive checking and mulligan and aspects of that too. So you could do the probability if you want to, but it's a lot more consistent. And one of the things I want to give a shout out to 02 Pass is that even if you ride this, the other 2 copies are kind of like dead cards. And maybe in Murakami, if they're binded, you can call them, but doesn't really come up that often either. But really, they're 5k shields at that point. You can discard them with PGs. You can kind of get around it, essentially. They're just 10k bodies at that point. But that's also what's good about it as a Vanguard. It's a 10k body. It's not the end of the world for certain decks because they make better numbers now too. But that's kind of nice to have, especially for clans that need a booster early on. And because you're a grade 2, that's a 10k base, if they really want to hit over, they may call a booster, which, guess what? Now they have a rear guard that you can dominate next turn a lot easier too as well. So it just kind of forces the opponent in a way to call boosters if needed, to really have some pressure outside of you just having an early game that's really strong. And what does this card even do is that when it's placed on Vanguard, you can check the top 5 and look for stealth cards. And then essentially you soul charge 1, and then if you have any remaining, that it's another additional one because you pick 2, you can call it to rear guard circle. This helps a lot because if you do Unen, that Soul Blast and searches the grade 3 that you need, this refunds the soul essentially. But not only that, you call something else, which be a grade 1, a grade 2, usually most of the time. But you can also call your grade 3. So you can call like your Shiranui Borrow if you didn't have it, because there's ways to bounce it back to get it so that way on your grade 3 turn, you can ride it. So that's how that consistency is helped, that you can search into this. And if you really need the grade 3, not only you're decked in into potentially draw into it or drive check it or even draw from a damage check, for example, this card can kind of help with that with another combo card to get it into your hand. And so this is actually really valuable. So like in theory, it seems kind of simple, but the more you play this deck, you value that. Like if you can get that off, you're in a very good position moving forward. And you could also soul charge grade 3 stealth cards. So you can soul charge like excess Oboros, excess like Mizukaze, for example, if you really need to. But essentially, you'll have a Mizukaze live moving forward at that point too. So don't ever discount that. And so the card that I mean that can help with the synergy of bouncing is this guy, Yami Shibuki. So this card on attack, you can counterblast, bounce or rear guard, and then generate 2 tokens. Now, when you generate the 2 tokens, this guy has a continuous skill where it's plus 5k for every token on your board, or grade 0 rear guards technically, actually. So you can call triggers if needed to, but most of the time it's your tokens, right? So he gets powerful. He becomes 19k when he attacks. The attack pattern that sometimes I do is that when Shocho Doji calls something, and then it's on Vanguard, and then this is in the other column, I do the other rear guard first, and then I do this guy next, and it's 19. So if they hit over a trigger, then you can still hit, and then I attack with the Vanguard. And you may be asking why not like across, because you can take advantage of a drive check trigger, well, of a trigger, potentially drive check, and that's true. But I've had moments where I healed and I'm back to 0, and then now my stuff is on the board, and that's like my advantage that I want to get. But also the tokens, again, like I mentioned, provide intercept value. They're also set up for like making it stronger, because if you don't have any counterblast, then it's just a 9k, it doesn't do much. And then if your like Jakumesso turn is coming up next, then like you wish you had the token set up at that point too, assuming they don't have a matchup that gets rid of them at that point. But this card is really also a beater too, so if you get damage denied, just call your grade 0s if needed be, like your ones that go into Soul, or if you have existing tokens. This is a 14, 19, 24k beater that you can reliably use, and it can have like the additional pressure before you do your skills and also like your battle phase shenanigans as well. And so the last grade 2 that we're playing 2 Ungai. Ungai is one of the cards in Vanguard, especially in Premium, that can deal with triggers, but not only that, but over triggers. And so what I mean by that is that GB1, when placed on rearguard circle, choose up to 2 of your rearguards and up to 1 of your opponent's rearguard units, and force them to 11k. So you can increase your units to 11k, making like 11k hitters or 22k columns that way, but you force your opponent's Vanguard back to 11k. So if they get a trigger, or they're 12, 13k base, or they got an over trigger, back to 11, baby. It says no to the over trigger at that point. And during Jakumesso turn, you can call this if needed, because like, haha, I got a trigger, now you hit weaker, blah blah blah. But then it's like surprise, and it's like back to 11, and it's like, oh man. And also this comes up a lot with a Rinne turn, because they may take like one of the crit 2 attacks to get 2 chances of seeing triggers, and if they got triggers, then it makes your turn a little harder to finish. But then you call this, and then you call Mizukaze, they're like, oh shoot, you know, it makes it really hard. So that's why I recommend playing 2 cards. This is very important. The other skill does not come up as often, so I don't even think about it really. It's just a filter at that point. But most of the time, it's the on-call GB1 11k skill that's like the most important too. Onto the grade 0s, we're playing this so we can get the tickets like with the Messiah, but also draw a card, dig deeper into our deck. The name doesn't really matter, so you can play any starter. I just picked it because it's SP. This is the stride crit. Moving forward, you want to use the stride crit to actually stride into your Rinnes, your Jakumessos later on, cards like that. So you can preserve your grade 3s because you may need to rewrite them against the Mega Colony matchup. You may need to use them for the Geta Strike, but you might also call them to rear guards, such as Mizukaze and the other Shiranui, because they're better rear guards because of their skills. So that's why you need those crit fodders. And then 4 more crit. This is the Shiranui crit, so it goes into Soul when your Vanguard attacks with Shiranui, +5 and draw a card. And also damage check, they added the errata where you can draw a card, which is super valuable in Nubatama. We still need combo pieces to really do our thing. So this having the extra draw really goes a long way. And then also the errata where they're 15k shield and 10k power as well. So if you're still new and aren't aware, these got errata to be like updated triggers essentially. And I definitely recommend them. Even in Hanzo is really good. So we're playing the 3 draw PG because we do play the 1 Centric dude. You need draw power, but also like you just need a PG. Even though you have the protect markers, you still value PGs. I thought of like the 30k Sentinels, but there's gonna be matchups where you might not be able to do the protect play. And if you ride Shiranui or Boro, there's no way for you to get a protect marker. So you want to make sure you have PGs for those matchups. But also like if you're going against like the Shiranui mare, you want to keep protect markers in case of Rinne. So then you want to use these as PGs instead at that point. And then lastly, we have the OT. Now the OT, I do want to spend some time on this. This actually came up in 2 of my games in BCS, but it also has came up in practice. And it was really weird at first because I was like, why does this one keep coming up? And especially with this deck, you do draw, but it's not a lot. But you've also decked in. So this can come up a lot more often, whether it be your drive checks or your damage checks, which can save you. But then, like, if you think about it with your strides, they become a lot more nuttier when you have a restanding Vanguard on top of that too. So don't ever discount this. So that's why when I thought about like the red OT or the blue OT, the Dragon Empire OT just is really good compared to those in this deck. There's also cards like Jakumesso and also the on hit that are not once per turn. So you can actually have a restanding Jakumesso that's like crit 3 on top of like the Dragon Empire. If you gave the power to it or you gave it to a rigger, it just depends on the power, but it's like a big beater with like crit 2 and then crit 3 restand. It's just really nutty at that point. Assuming you have the tokens or the grade zeros that you can retire for that, but like things like that. Oh, there's an interaction with Mukuro that did come up, and I will elaborate that. So onto the strides, we're playing number 1 harmonics. You get your ticket. I never used it for the other skills. It doesn't really matter. It's really for the 20k shield. Definitely appreciate it, especially against the Nubatama mare. You appreciate the extra ticket that you can hold on to and hopefully not get Rinne yourself. 2 of the Geda. This is really the persona flip that you need. You get the 2 protect markers. You get discard. It's the continuous on hit. It makes it happen. This is really what makes Nubatama now relevant, especially going first. You have that grade 3 turn that's a little more solid. If you're going second, most likely you'll go into Jakumesso. At first, I did not have this card. In fact, I was playing like Drakban, I was playing like Sukurumoroken and some other phenomenal strides, but a lot of it, Nubatama is a very situational deck. It's really weird. It's not like bad, but like it has to be a specific scenario, like game state wise, to make a certain stride go into it. And Jakumesso is a lot more lenient on that. So if your opponent's on less damage or high damage, it's still a good stride to go into if needed be. And so again, on attack, flip something, and then you get to retire to grade 0. So you can use tokens, or you could also use triggers if need to be, ideally tokens. And then draw 2 cards, bounce everything, and then call up to 2 cards. And if you did call 2, plus crit, plus 10k. Very free card, doesn't need counterblast. Really, the only counterblast you need in this turn is really the token generator, if you do need it. Otherwise, it's a free turn essentially. And then I played 2 because your opponents, a very smart opponent, will play around the Rinne. And I have even tempted to reduce Rinne to 2 pairs only too. So, but I still play the 4. But essentially, like having the second Jakumesso is another alternate in addition to go into and keep up a hand advantage. You do generate advantage, and you can still take advantage of Mizukaze. So then you have the pressure still there with multi attack, and it's only 5 attacks, maybe 4 attacks depending on your setup. So you don't have to worry about Hanali being a problem. And also you can kind of draw into your Hanali or other cards that you may need defensively, or you may draw into the Mizukaze and then call it during the battle phase, and it's like, haha, surprise. So there's a lot of value from this card, and so we are playing the 4 Rinne. So I only got 2 SPs because we're not sure what we're getting in the Shiranui deck set. I'm hoping something really good, but we'll see. If not, I'll get the rest of the SPs. But essentially we are playing 4 of these bad boys. So Rinne is really counterblast 1. Your opponent chooses 2 cards, they call them, it gets +5, but then the GB3 skill, when you do this, they'll get another 10k and a crit. So they attack the Vanguard dominated essentially. And so that's where you can value that pressure, and you really rip their hand, but also with the Mizukaze, you really limit what they can guard that turn, and essentially you can deal with 6 damage. So this is really our powerhouse stride that we really want to go into, ideally. But depending on your opponent, if they know how to play against Nubatama, they're going to make it harder. So it may take you a while to like maybe the 3rd or 4th stride to really actually get into it. That's why I played 2 Jakumessos, and you also have the on-hit history collection stride too, just in case you need to go back into it. and it's just very powerful, but also at the same time, like it's still kind of like weakened. So I hope that makes sense. And another great mid-game stride is Mukuro, and shout out to Do Card Fight. I know I was not playing this because of Drachma, but he's like, you should take out Drachma and play this card. It comes up against Mega Colony. It comes with like some control-based decks. Some decks that even deny you damage, so you can't really do your strides because most of your strides use a counterblast, and except for Jakumesso. But if you're out of Jakumessos or you don't have the tokens or the grade zeros to go into Jakumesso, that stride is dead. So then you need another card, and that's really Mukuro, where it's like Soul Blast 2, GB2, flip something, and discard a card, dominate your opponent's Vanguard, and then attack their rearguards. They need to see at least one rearguard so you can do the actual attack that's dominated. And here's what is cool and has happened to me at the BCS. And it happened to me once, and it happened to my mirror match, my opponent on his as well. You can dominate your opponent's Vanguard, and you're doing the drive checks from your deck. So if you draw check the OT, that's just the Dragon Empire one, you can restand their Vanguard and give the 100 million to your Vanguard, the Mukuro. Now, why would you do that? Because it made me realize that like Darkface, for example, is 11k. And so a lot of the other decks that are relying on the history collection erratas, they're 11k base Vanguards. However, because of V-Series, they also use rearguards from those sets that are 12k base, that are 13k base. So like, for example, Mega Colony had Hell Demise. So you have a Mega Colony Darkface attack the rearguards. The only thing that survived the first attack was technically the Hell Demise because it's a 12k. It hit under, so it didn't die. So because you restood with the Dragon Empire, but gave the 100 million to your own Vanguard, Darkface dominated is still 11k. And you can attack again, the Hell Demise, purposely miss, but guess what? You get 2 more drive checks. Potentially more crits, potentially draws from your own deck, and it makes your Mukuro stride turn even stronger. But you also just get free advantage because also the Dragon Empire OT draws you a card as well. And then your Vanguard or your other rearguard that's 100 million plus, they have to deal with that too on top of that. So this is kind of nutty actually. So I wanted to like show that off because it actually came up. And then 2 copies of Mugen Lord. So I really wanted to see like if there was a worst case scenario where I couldn't Rinne, Jakumesso was impossible. I may have used Mukuro, or maybe I didn't have enough soul for Mukuro. Is there another stride especially if they were at 5 damage, ideally? It would be Mugen Lord, because at that point you flipped enough cards where you can dominate a bunch of cards, assuming they have a decent size rearguard field. And so that's another thing that you have to be cautious of. And you also have to be cautious on the on-strike dominate because they can double intercept and get rid of the rearguards, and then you have less targets for Mugen Lord, so you have to be careful about that. But this is another finisher once it gets to that point, and if you can't do Rinne, then you might as well use this card essentially. Now for the G guards, we're playing 2 of this. This card is really good. It's gotten a lot better too, because like Counterblast get plus 5k until the battle for each of your opponent's cards in hand. So people are still building up massive hands. So if you think about it, like 5 cards already, like 5 times 5 is 25k shield, which makes this a 40k shield. So anything above and beyond can actually like make a no pass, especially if you know the OT's out. It can like no pass Vanguards at that point, which is phenomenal at that point. So I put 2 because it's the biggest shield that we can rely on. And this deck, as you can see, doesn't counterblast a lot, so you still have the counterblast to use on the G-Guard plays. To follow with that, we also have the Kohorokan. This is your dominate one of the grade ones in the back row specifically. This can really mess up certain plays too, so don't discount this. A good example is Grand Blue. Sometimes they want a booster for the Nightstorm or for the Beatrice that they call on the following turn. You can still G-Guard, and so like if you can make a column weaker, especially if you damage check the trigger, that makes you like 21k base or 22k base. Nightstorm by itself won't be hitting. Beatrice by itself won't be hitting. So they typically like to put a Tommy in the back row to make that like sweet number. But if you get rid of it while guarding a different attack, guess what? It's less guarding for that. So don't discount that. And also there's other cards like Brilliant Blister. They're trying to boost and bounce it back and like, no, give me that Brilliant Blister. That ain't going back to your hand. You can grab it before they get it, essentially. Assuming they didn't Gridoro you. Most of the time they will. So this doesn't happen as often, but when they don't, haha, I got my surprises too. Then there's also the Gando Karakan. This is your free one. Essentially, if they have 3 or more, you get plus 5, and then they have 6 or more, they get the additional 10. So it's a 30k shield, which is appreciated. So in this segment, I'm just gonna show up a simple red progression, and this is gonna be the ideal one. So obviously, there's gonna be cards that help you consistently get to this. But essentially, your grade 1 will be Unen, your grade 2 will be the Shoujo Doji, and then obviously your Oboro. This is assuming you're going first. And at this point, this can be whatever X cards, essentially. So you'll draw into turn. Then write the Unin that you have. You'll draw for turn, pass. We got a Sanctitude, take a damage, get a heal, but don't trigger, obviously. Goes to our turn and we draw a card. And so, oh, we got another copy. But essentially, this is where the magic happens. You can Soul Blast 1, reveal the Oboro, and then search for, in this case, I'm going to search for Forbidden. And here's what's cool. If you had cards like, let's say, PGs, crits, the OT, for example, somewhere, I don't know, the OT, for example, in hand, this is your opportunity to shuffle your deck, but also then bottom deck it. And then what's really cool is that the grade 2 will proc next. And so the grade 2 is going to check the top 5. Oh, I don't think I actually did. So in this case, I'm going to just shove Honolulu back. And so this will be the top 5. So you have some options. And here's what's really cool. If you don't have necessarily the cards to like bounce with this card, so that's valuable. And then in this case, you can either Soul Charge these. I'm going to Soul Charge the grade 2 because I'd rather have the grade 1 shield. This is not a stealth. That's the one weakness about it, but it's still well worth it. And then you shuffle your deck. And in this case, you can have a bit of an early game. So I'm going to put this over here because of the glare. And I'm going to grab my hand. And you can call anything to regard as another attacker. So let's say we call another copy, hit the 10. Like I said, you want to attack this safely. So you get kind of less 1. To get the 2 tokens. I typically do behind it and also like behind the Vanguard. So this, if this needs a booster, you can still make a column if needed. Bounce the other card. And again, this card could have been like from hand. This could have been called from this. That could have been the Shiranui Oboro if you want to. This will be 19. And then your Vanguard will attack. Also note that the tokens cannot boost. They cannot attack either. They have the intercept ability. So that's why they're able to intercept in the back row. And then you can attack. Boom. Critical. And oh, that worked out, a critical trigger. So now you take a stab. You can guard with the 5k intercepts. You can guard with this guy too, or you can keep it on board in your hand. As you can see, this is what it looks like. Once you write Shiranui Oboro, you can use the Forbidden to get your grade 3s that you need. And so just keep that in mind. And so let's say they just give you a damage and you, let's say they kill the token or you intercept it with it and then just proceed with your turn. And, oh, I drew into this. Let's say we didn't draw into this and draw something else. Sure, Mizukaze. We're not going to really use it anyway. So, write your Oboro, of course, and then you can do the Forbidden. Assuming you didn't have, like, a grade 3 to stride with first, I would recommend doing that. Otherwise, you can go the other way. It just keeps your opponent kind of guessing before you actually do, like, Forbidden, for example. So, you can call these like this. Then this will Soul Blast. And this is where if you want, you can Soul Blast like 2 cards. Get 2 tokens. You can go aggressive with 2 if you really want to. In this case, that's what it looks like. And in fact, honestly, maybe you want to do something like this. Yeah, like that. And you'll see why. Yeah, something like that. And then you'll pitch the Cosmic Stride with this in case you don't need it anymore. And you go into Geta, do the skill to get the 2 markers. We got our Misaki Protect markers that are signed, fairly nice. This is our hand so far. On stride, dominate something. And if they have a rear guard, assuming that you dominated at that point, then you can attack first with this if you want. This is 22, go into Soul, draw a card, bounce something, make them discard. At that point, you can then attack this way. Drive checks, oh crit, oh. Again, you're decked in a little bit, so you can see trick. Ooh, double crit. Yeah, that's really good. And then now this triggers, make them discard a card. And then on attack, you can actually do... I mean, you don't have to boost the Honolulu. If you want to use the Honolulu for, like, the next turn, like, actually against a multi-attack, you can, like, remove it from play and then call another booster if you wanted to. So there's flexibility in that. And you call 2 more tokens because you have the extra Counter Blast, right? And now this is plus 20. This is 29. So that can hit. And if you have any triggers, which we did, this will be 39, 49. And by the end of the turn, unstride. And then, of course, this is our hand now. So we have about 3, 5, 7, 10, 12 cards in hand. With 2 protect markers, we have a Mizukaze for the next turn. We also have a crit fodder if we need to. We have another Honolulu if we need to do Honolulu again. Actually, this is the one I bounced to. So, and we also have the Sanctitude for additional guard. And guess what? We have a grade 3 install. And so it's really up to this point if they're playing against the Rinne or you go into Jakumesso. And then this is where you defensively can also use the intercepts to guard with. So that way, if you do go into Jakumesso, then you can use these tokens to pop off. If you don't, and you go into Rinne or a different stride, you now can still use these tokens for cards like this to gain power still. And later on, you can use them with intercept ability, or you can save them for the next stride to go into Jakumesso. And that's it, amigos. So I hope you enjoyed the deck profile. I hope it made sense. A lot of it was like really solid after like a month or two. I think it was almost 2 months. I wanted to give special credit to select players too. Special thanks to 02 Pass, Crow, Sakib, Lie by Night, Duke Card Fight, and also to you guys in the Nubatama group and those who have I chatted as well. Thank you for you guys. Like, I love chatting about like Nubatama and actually finding a solidified deck build. I'm very confident in this, and I was so proud to actually like take it and do well. I actually had a blast, like just playing the deck itself. I went X2. I faced some interesting matchups. I'll put them in the pinned comment too, but notable matchups were like against my 2 losses were for Katrina, Neo Nectar, and OTT, Susano / like the Popo Witch combo. So basically, my round 1 was against Katrina Inez, and it did not go well. In fact, what I realized too is that I was going second, and so I thought they would ride up, but I don't know why I didn't think of them. Like, that would be probably disadvantages, so they might stay a grade 2, which they did. So I didn't have the Oboro, I had the other Shiranui, and then I'm like, crap, that I just lost the momentum, because if I ride the V Shiranui, I still cannot stride. And it doesn't really do much if I can't stride either. So then it's just like, crap, I wish I had the Oboro. Then I could go into Geta and then do my thing. And I think I would have actually won that match, but it is what it is at that point too. The OTT player that I lost to, Darren, is from Vegas, group of amigos. I know Counter Guardian was mentioning like he's one of the amigos, and also Flagberg in my server too. So shout out to you guys too. But essentially, they got the deck size to 10 cards or less. Popos became active, but they're also the Ichikishime still water stride. So essentially, their Vanguard was swinging where you couldn't G-guard and you couldn't call zeros. So I did a protect marker to guard against it. But then the Popo say you can only guard with zeros. But then Ichikishima is a whole turn spread out blanket effect. So then that means you cannot guard with squat from hand. The only thing around it is the Blitz Order Sanctitude or some other effects or intercepts. But like, he stacked the deck that he got triple crit. And he distributed those triggers where essentially each Popo was crit 3. And guess what? I was at 3 damage. So he literally one-shot me from 3 to 6. And I was GG. And even if I lived one of them, I couldn't stop the second Popo. It's the same thing. 3 crit. How am I going to heal like 5 times or something like that? Something crazy. But everything else, I did beats. I faced like Genesis. I faced Mega Colony, for example. I faced the Nubatama Mare. That was a grand game with Sakib. So shout out to that. I learned a lot. People were watching our game because of like, how does the Nubatama Mare play out? And our decks were basically low, and we're almost decking out and went into time. And unfortunately, he had 4 damage. I had 3, so he lost because of time at that point. But it was a grind game. I hope we finish it next time. So the next time we play each other, I'm looking forward to it. And so I know some of you have been waiting for this deck profile. It's finally out, and this is the reason why I didn't do it like a month ago. It's because I've been working on it, tinkering with it, honing it, but also like participating in BCS Rosemont. And I'm just grateful that I had a chance to play Nubatama competitively again. Something different outside of Aquaforce and Grand Blue and Genesis and some of those other decks that I play competitively. So I like Ninjas. Place in my heart. But other than that, you want to support the channel, use the affiliated links with TCG Player, 50 Card Shop, Trading Card Man, etc. But also, if you want to book a Metafy session, feel free to check out my info and help you for this BCS season. On to the next one, amigos. Bye!